21 days. That's how long her rosebush had been standing in that corner pot, brown as a paper bag, leaves curled inward like clenched fists. She'd already apologized to it twice. She'd even started picturing the compost pile as its funeral pyre. Then an old man from 3 houses down walked over, pinched the stem between his thumb and forefinger, scraped the bark with a fingernail, and said something that made her stop mid-apology. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what he saw and what she did an hour later to drag that bush back from the edge. No $40 bottles required. The secret isn't in the fertilizer aisle. It never was. What brings a plant back has been sitting in your kitchen trash the whole time. And the old gardener's test proves it in under 10 seconds. But here's the trap. If you do this one thing wrong, you won't revive the plant. You'll feed the mold instead. Let me show you the difference between a plant that's faking death and a plant that's really gone. Because that distinction is the entire game. Most people read a dead plant the way they read a headline. Surface level, no investigation. They see brown leaves, they smell dry soil, and they reach for the biggest, shiniest bottle of chemical rescue on the shelf. The label promises everything. The price demands respect. And 3 weeks later, the plant is still brown, only now the soil has a suspicious white crust on top. You know that feeling. You've stood there with a watering can in one hand and a receipt in the other, wondering if you just paid $30 to poison a plant that was already halfway out the door. That synthetic stuff doesn't heal. It pushes salts and nitrogen into roots that are too stressed to drink. And the burn shows up as yellow edges on leaves that were already yellow. It's like giving a drowning man a glass of seawater. The old gardener from 3 houses down, the one with the lemon tree that survives every drought and the basil that outlives every winter, he doesn't buy fertilizer. He's never bought it. Decades of stubborn trial and error taught him that the answer was already in his kitchen. And he tests every wilting plant the same way before he lifts a finger. He scrapes the stem. That stem scrape, the old gardener's first interrogation, separates the plants that can be revived from the ones that are already gone. If you want to keep building your own case file on kitchen scrap secrets, subscribe now. Because every scrap holds a confession the experts never gave you. Then drop a comment right here. When you scrape a stem, what color do you usually see? And does it match what I just described? Not the leaf, not the soil. The stem itself, near the base, just deep enough to peel back the outer bark. If the layer underneath is green and moist, the plant isn't dead. It's dormant. It's waiting. It's a zombie in the best sense of the word, still alive under the surface, playing dead until the right conditions wake it up. And the thing that wakes it isn't from a bag. Here's where the failure case starts, and you need to hear this before you touch anything. If you scrape the stem and find gray, brown, or black tissue underneath, dry and crumbly like old matchsticks, that branch is gone. No amount of water, scraps, or prayer brings back dead tissue. The plant may still have living roots, but the top is finished. That's why the test matters so much. It tells you whether you're about to perform a rescue or a burial. The woman with the rose bush scraped her stem and found green. Pale, yes.
Need to prune
Thin,
it
definitely.
right here.
But green, alive.
Like this?
So the old gardener
Exactly.
gave her
That's
one
the one.
instruction, and it wasn't about buying anything. It was about the coffee. If you've ever dumped leftover ground straight into a pot and watched the plant get worse, you already know half the mistake. Fresh coffee is acidic and hot enough to burn tender roots. The chemical equivalent of pouring vinegar on an open wound. But that's not what he told her to use. He told her to use the dried, spent grounds from the bottom of the filter, rinsed through once more, spread on a sheet of newspaper to dry in the sun for a full afternoon. You can feel the difference before you even start. Dry, spent grounds crumble between your fingers with a gritty, oily texture, dark as river silt, carrying a faint, roasted smell that's completely different from the sharp bite of fresh coffee. They don't clump. They don't steam. They behave like soil, because after that long brewing and drying process, that's almost what they are. While she waited for the grounds to dry, he made her do the scratch test on every brown stem. And here's what most people miss. She found green tissue on some branches and dry gray mush on others. The bush wasn't entirely dead or entirely alive, and it was a mosaic. Each dead branch had to come off, cleanly snipped at an angle so the wound could seal, while each live branch stayed. That pruning step is where most gardeners quit, because cutting away brown sticks feels like giving up. This is where most gardeners quit. They see a half-dead plant, they get sentimental, and they try to save every branch like it's a family heirloom. Keep the dead wood attached, and the plant keeps pouring energy into tissue that can't recover. You have to be willing to amputate the losses to fund the living parts. By the time the grounds had dried and cooled, the bush was down to 2 solid stems and a stub. It looked worse before it looked better. She almost changed her mind, and that nearly cost her everything. That moment when she almost stopped, that's the exact hesitation that kills most recoveries before they start. If you want the full case file on what actually saves a plant, subscribe so you don't miss the next piece of evidence. In the comments, drop the word amputate if you've ever had to cut something away to save the rest. Here's the method she used, and you'll want to write this down because the order matters as much as the ingredients. She mixed a handful of dried spent grounds with a half handful of crushed eggshell, and the eggshell part isn't decoration. Crushed eggshells break down slowly, releasing calcium over months, and that calcium is exactly what a stressed plant needs to rebuild cell walls. The fine powder acts as a gentle buffer against the coffee's residual acidity, while the bigger shards keep the soil loose so water actually reaches the roots instead of pooling on top. Mix them dry first in a bowl so the textures combine evenly. Then sprinkle the blend across the soil surface half an inch from the stem and work it in with your fingers until it disappears. She used her bare fingers, pressing the blend into the first inch of soil, feeling the gritty crumple of shells and grounds under her knuckles. You can sense the texture change as you go, from compacted, crusty dirt to a loose, crumbly layer that breathes. That aeration is part of the rescue. A plant that looks dead often isn't thirsty at the top. The soil has hardened so tight that water can't penetrate, and the roots are suffocating. But this is the part nobody warns you about. Water is only half the resurrection. The other half is refusal to let the plant drown. She filled the watering can, 1 liter, lukewarm, never ice cold, because cold water shocks stressed roots like a slap to the face, and poured it slowly in rings, starting 6 inches from the stem and spiraling inward. The soil drank it. The bubbles rose, and when the surface stopped accepting, she stopped pouring. Over the next 3 days, nothing happened. She checked every morning, still brown, still stiff. The old gardener came by on the 2nd day, ran his hand over the soil, and nodded without saying a word. She wanted to shake him. On the 3rd morning, she almost pulled the whole thing out. Then, on the afternoon of the 4th day, she saw it, a single dot of green at the base of the left stem. Tiny, easy to dismiss, but it was there, a pinhead of chlorophyll breaking through the gray bark, And the old gardener just smiled and walked back to his lemon tree like he'd known all along. Within 10 days, that green dot had become a cluster, and the cluster had become real leaves. Small, pale, fragile at first, then darker and thicker every single day. The stems that had creaked under her touch stiffened until they snapped back when bent. The soil that had reeked of dust now smelled like earth, that deep, sweet, humus scent you get after rain on healthy ground. She didn't need a moisture meter. The smell told her everything. The neighbor across the fence stopped mid-mow. You know that look, the tilt of the head, the squint of the eye, the jaw that drops just enough for a word to slip out. How'd you do that? And that's the moment the whole investigation snapped into focus. One plant, one kitchen scrap, $0 spent. Compare that to the control. She had a second bush, identical age, same sun exposure that she'd treated with the liquid fertilizer from the hardware store, the one that claimed instant results. It grew, but it grew pale, spindly, stretching toward the light like it was begging. The leaves were thin and yellowish green, and the roots, when she finally inspected them, were shallow and brittle. The rescued bush, by contrast, was solid, dark green, and its roots had spread through the bottom of the pot in a web you could feel just by tapping the drainage holes. The difference isn't magic. It's nitrogen and carbon, slow release instead of chemical spike. Coffee grounds feed the soil microbes, and the microbes feed the roots. A chain that takes days instead of an hour. The store-bought fertilizer throws a load of salts at a plant that can't absorb them. The kitchen scrap builds a soil community that does the work for you. That victory you just witnessed, the neighbor frozen mid-mow, the roots webbing through the pot, the humus in the air, wasn't a one-time break in the case. Every scrap has a file like this, and I'm not closing the investigation until we've turned your whole kitchen bin into a forensic advantage. Subscribe now and stay on the evidence trail. The next scrap we examine might be the one your soil is missing right now. And in the comments, drop the exact phrase the neighbor said, 3 words that prove the old method outwork the shelf every time. But let's talk about the trap you have to avoid, because this is where the whole thing turns sour. If you bury a thick layer of wet coffee grounds straight from the filter deep into the soil, airtight, you're not feeding the plant, you're brewing a fungal colony. The grounds cake into a dense mat, the soil goes anaerobic, and after about a week, you'll smell it. That sour, rotten, fermenting odor that comes from a pot that's no longer alive. Ants come, fungus gnats come, and the plant, instead of reviving, starts declining from a problem you created. No soaking the leaves either. That's the mistake that kills more rescue attempts than anything else. People see a thirsty plant and they douse the foliage, expecting it to drink through its skin. It doesn't. It tries. But wet leaves on a weakened plant invite mold, rot, and a slow death. Water the soil in rings slowly and leave the leaves alone. Let the roots do their job. And the big lie you'll hear everywhere, that any dead-looking plant can come back. Not true. You have to prove there's green tissue inside the stem first. If the stem is dry and gray all the way down, that part is gone. If the roots are mush instead of firm, the plant has already left the building. The scratch test isn't a trick. It's triage, separating what can be saved from what has to go. That's why the rescued rosebush matters. It's a case study in what happens when you stop guessing and start checking. She didn't throw money at the problem. She tested the tissue, cut the losses, fed the survivors with scraps, and gave the roots time and slow water. Nothing about that process is glamorous. Everything about it works. Now imagine your own wilted plant, the one you've been apologizing to. Scrape the stem, check for green. If it's there, you have a chance. And the cure is already in your compost bin or your coffee filter. Dry the grounds, crush the shells, mix them, work them into the surface, and water in slow rings. Then step back and wait. Plants don't operate on your timeline. They wake up. The old gardener didn't say anything when he left. He just pointed at the new leaves, gave a short nod, and walked off to his lemon tree. That was the closest thing to a confession he'd ever offer. Proof, not praise. In the next investigation, we're putting banana peels on trial. You will not believe what the potassium does to a struggling tomato plant. And the one mistake that turns the whole peel into a plant killer instead of a cure.